What's up, guys? Welcome back to FishOfHex. My name is Travis. In today's video, we're going to be doing another email Q&A. This one is number 10. Now, if you want to be part of these videos, email your questions to fishofhex@gmail.com, and they are answered in the order in which they're received. Sound like one of those recorded messages for a second there. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and try to extend this video for 15 or 20 minutes. We'll see. I definitely have a few to get through, and be mindful, there might be some cricket noise in the background. Just as I mentioned yesterday, there are crickets loose, not only in the fish room apparently, but also in Spike's cage, and he's too lazy to go chase them around. So, yeah, I'm going to be building a recording booth, zero to real quick, that's for sure. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first question. Hey, Travis, long-time listener, first-time caller. Anyways, quick question. I have been watching your quarantine videos, but I don't recall you explaining how you transfer fish from a quarantine tank to the main display, since you're using copper. And happy Father's Day. Well, appreciate that. Sorry it took so long to get to your email. Now, when it comes to transferring from the quarantine tank to the main display, it's pretty simple. My entire method is just like this. So I'll take the fish out of the quarantine tank, and they'll go into a designated 5-gallon bucket that has quarantine wrote on the side. That way I'm not using it with my main display, possibly transferring copper into it. Now what I'll do is I'll drip acclimate for about 30 minutes or so from the main display. I would do longer if my temperatures or salinity weren't exactly the same as the main display, but I try to keep them relatively close. Now, once I drip acclimate for about 45 minutes or so, I'll go ahead and then take some water in a separate container, maybe like a bowl or something that I pick up from the dollar store. I'll take some water from the main display. It doesn't have to be a lot, and I'll set it on the floor, and then I'll pick up or net the fish that I'm trying to put in the main display, let them sit in that container for a couple minutes, and then transfer them into the main display tank. That way, any copper that might still be on him will just stay in that container, and again, not get into your main display. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, next question. I'm an experienced reefer. I've been in the hobby on and off for about 5 years. I love and support the YouTube channel and would love to purchase some SPS from your main display. I recently sold all of my LPS and converting to SPS Reef. I have a few pieces of SPS just to get my tank chemistry correct to see how the SPS will respond. But my question is, the SPS I have are not RTNN and not STNN, but the polyps are not extending. I have a Jetty Mind Trick and a Stylophora and a few Monties. Need help or advice to convert the tank. And is the API Master Reef good for a good start for the conversion? Okay, so let's go ahead and first answer the API test kit question. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of API. I know in the beginning I used them just when I was just getting in the hobby in general, even in the freshwater side. And they're good if you just want a general idea how your water parameters are. But if you're looking for accurate readings, something that's easy to identify, I would not use API. I would go ahead and, since you're purchasing SPS and you're spending the money to convert your tank over to that, I would spend the money and get a HANA checker for your alkalinity and your phosphates, and then I would use Red Sea for your nitrates, your calcium, your magnesium, and then I like to use the Milwaukee for the salinity, but you don't have to do that. You could use even a refractometer, won't be an issue. As long as you're not using the hydrometer, you're good. So that's what I would recommend for the test kit. You know, it's just better to know exactly what you have going on than to be guessing between different shades of red or whatever color it might be at that time. All right, so moving on to the, you're not RTNN or STNN, but your polyps are not extending. Again, if you, I don't know what you're using for a test kit now, and since you're asking about API, I can only imagine using something lower end like that. So, you know, maybe your water parameters are not where you think they are. Maybe you have too much direct flow. Those are pretty common. Alkalinity fluctuations will piss off polyps. Again, too much flow. Any number of water parameters could be off. And if you're not testing with an accurate device or a method, you're not going to get really a good idea where you're at. So I would say before you start making any major changes to the reef tank, I would get better, more reliable test kits, and then see where your water parameters actually are, and then make any adjustments. Maybe your salinity is too high and you just don't know. Maybe your alkalinity is 3 points off than what you thought it was, and you're still dosing or something. So again, it all starts from the base. Get reliable test kits and then make your changes from there. So good luck. All right, moving on. The next question is from Dave. Hey, I have a question about the glue that you use. I have watched a lot of your YouTube videos and noticed that you use a huge bottle of glue. I don't know if you have made a video about the materials you use. Can you please tell me what materials you use and how you use it if you mix different glues together? I'm trying to frag different corals now that they are growing out of control. I'm in the Navy and I'm going to be deploying soon, and I'm trying to get everything set up for my wife so she doesn't have to be so overwhelmed with taking care of our reef tank. I would like to have a big bottle of glue ready for her, so if she decides to cut corals and place them on frag plugs. Thanks, Travis, for the awesome information you put out on your YouTube channel. Okay, so I get the glue from Bulk Reef Supply. We'll put a link in the description. If I perhaps forget to do so during the rest of the editing process, just remind me in the comment section and I will link it. Now, it's just their huge, I think 10-ounce bottle or 20-ounce bottle, I'm not sure, something like that. I think it's 10, of their super thick gel super glue. That's it, nothing fancy, and I use the quick set depending on what I'm fragging. So yeah, I will put the link down there, and be safe on your deployment. All right, next question. Hey Travis, I have a question regarding quarantining a yellow tank. My current quarantine setup is a 10-gallon with a hang on the back filter and some PVC. I have read a lot about tanks getting ick from being stressed out, and I'm worried about the 10-gallon quarantine tank doing so. Will a 10-gallon tank do the job? Question mark. Or do I need to upgrade the quarantine tank for the tank to maybe a 20-gallon long, or 20-gallon, sorry. And should I add copper only if he shows signs of parasites, or add it regardless? I appreciate any advice you can provide, and still new to reefing, and your videos are a lot of help. Yep, okay. So it's a myth that fish get ick because they're stressed. They already have ick in their system, and stress just causes a weakening of the immune system, and then the parasite shows its face. So regardless of the size of the tank you have isn't going to determine if a fish gets ick or not. What would decide if you go with a 10-gallon or a 20-gallon is how big the fish is. If the fish can easily turn around in the tank and it's swimming without any issues, then 10-gallon will be fine. But in most cases for tangs, unless they're really small, I mean sub 3 inches, I would go with a 20-gallon long, preferably, or even a 20-gallon would be fine. And that would be the quarantine tank for them during that whole period. So again, your tank size isn't going to determine if the fish gets ick or not. It's either has ick or it doesn't. Now, when it comes to treatment, I always do a preventative treatment of copper. Regardless, if they show signs of any parasites, I still do copper and I still do Pro, not at the same time, separately. So I'll do 2 weeks of or 14 days of copper, and then I'll do a 50% water change for like 3 days, or skip a day. So one day 50, next day 50, essentially 100%. And then I will dose Pro and do that for the remainder of their quarantine period, given another 2 or 3 weeks. So yeah. Hopefully that answers your question, and good luck. All right, moving on. Next question is about dosing equal parts. Some say to dose more alkalinity if your alk is being consumed more, etc. What's your take on this? I have a product in which I dose 10 milliliters of calcium, it raises it by 10. If I dose 50 milliliters of alkalinity, it raises it by 1 DKH. Can I dose equal parts of this, or should I mix up my own mixed or equal dosing solution? Now, when it comes to corals growing, in simplified terms, it takes 1 part alkalinity, 1 part calcium pulled out of the water to lay down skeletal structures. I don't know of any coral or anything out there that's going to pull out more alkalinity than calcium. Maybe a giant clam, it depends. And even then, they're still pulling out, you would think they would still be pulling out 1 part of each to be able to continue to grow. It might, I don't know. I've never had a giant clam in my tank, so I couldn't tell you if there is that, but I have heard of that being the case where clams are just alkalinity hogs. So I don't have any research, and I haven't done it personally to really back up that statement. So maybe you can dive into it a little bit more. But at the end of the day, if you look at methods like Kalkwasser and calcium reactors, what do they do to provide calcium alkalinity in your tank? They break down coral, for the calcium reactor, breaks down coral and releases 1 part calcium, 1 part alkalinity at one time, and then that's what's used up by the coral to grow. Same thing with the Kalkwasser. It's equal parts of calcium and alkalinity that are ending up in the water. So what I would do is if that was my situation and it seemed like I was consuming more than the other, I would take a look and see what your numbers actually are. If there's a mismatch or imbalance already present in the tank, or maybe your magnesium isn't in the correct level, you're going to see these fluctuations and these numbers that are not consistent because of some imbalance. So I would double check to see what your magnesium is at the first thing to do, and then I would see where your alkalinity and your calcium are at. If you're at 9 DKH and at 300 calcium, then there's a problem right there. You're already not at a correct ratio. But if you're at 9 DKH and 400 or 420 calcium, then you're fine. And in that case, if you are kind of mixed matched with 9 DKH and 300 calcium, I would do some water changes with a reliable salt, like Fritz or something that has that 9 DKH and roughly that 400 calcium, and do water changes of 30% over a week or so to help get that balance back in the tank, and then start dosing equal parts, and hopefully that will even itself out. All right. Okay, next question. I just finished watching your latest Q&A video. What Home Depot bulb did you say you use for your Refugium? I like to use the 5K floodlights. I know that it is the Home Depot brand. There is a Philips or whatever that I used to use, a little bit more expensive. It's the same thing. So I think you can get two 100 watt of those 5K floodlights for like $8.99 or something like that. So they're relatively cheap and they definitely do the job. Okay, so let's go to move on to the next question. I was wondering if you could help me with my nitrates being so high at 25 ppm. I have a 700-gallon tank and keep it pretty natural, only skimmer and refugium. Run some carbon also. Everything was undetectable for about 8 months, and I didn't do a water change for that time. That might be the reason, but water changes are kind of a pain because they are so large. And also put my refugium light for 18 hours on verse 9. That I had before. Heavy feeding also for my tank. I have 2 eels that are pretty big and also 3 large nasal tanks. So any ideas greatly appreciated. My question is, what is your phosphates at? 25 ppm is pretty high on nitrates, but I've seen tanks run upwards of 20 and not have any algae issues and seem to be doing fine. You didn't mention in here if you have any algae issues or any kind of problems in the main display, or are you just reading those that high number? Now, it seems like you have a fish-only tank. You didn't really say anything about having coral. And if you're not, if you have no coral, you're at 25 ppm and you're not having any algae issues, I would just keep doing your water changes, maybe increase the size of your refugium or add more lighting to let it grow a bit quicker. Carbon's not going to do anything for that. Maybe upgrade your skimmer if possible. You didn't really put in any detail of how big the fuge was or the skimmer, but basically you just need to export more nutrients one way or another, either doing the water changes or upgrading the skimmer, or even upgrading the fuge. Another thing you can do is cut back on feeding. I know that you said you had some pretty big eels. I'm assuming they eat a lot. Also, the nasal tanks eat and shit a lot as well. So, again, you just need to remove more nutrients. Whatever method you want to do that works for your budget. But I would work on it relatively soon. It seems like over those 8 months, those nutrients were building up within the rock. Now it's starting to show its face. He didn't really say how old the tank was currently or if there was any changes previous to the 8 months, but I would just increase your nutrient export, cut back on feeding, definitely do your water changes. I know they're a pain, but you could always automate them to a certain extent. And yeah, hopefully that helps. Good luck. Okay, moving on to our next question. I recently have only been testing alk and phosphates because I assumed that my Salifert test kit were lying and giving me crazy numbers like 600 calcium and 1600 magnesium, as well as 60 to 80 nitrate readings, while my Reef is looking amazing. I just finally got around to getting new test kits. I got a Red Sea this time and it says the exact same thing. What should I do? Even new corals are doing good in my tank. I put new snails in to see if they would die, but they're doing all good. Should I leave it alone? Well, the downside to leaving those kind of numbers alone is that it's going to compound over time. You need to figure out why your calcium is so high. You didn't mention what your alkalinity was, but there's got to be a reason why your calcium is high. I don't know what salt you're using, but there could be a bad batch of salt. When I've had issues with my magnesium was because I was using, Reef crystals. The 2 times I had it, and both times they brought my magnesium up to 2,000 parts per million, basically causing my snails to be lethargic and then eventually starving to death. So what I would do is figure out, test your water, okay, again, just to make sure those numbers are correct, and then make a new batch of salt and test that to see what your levels are. If your salt's coming out with 8 DKH and then you're having 600 calcium, there's definitely something wrong with that salt. And if your magnesium's high, it's the same way. So test the source of water, and then what I would do is once you figure that out and your water source is good, so say you have Fritz and everything is normal, I would look at other reasons why it might be high. Are you 2-part dosing? Maybe the pump isn't calibrated correctly and you're dosing too much calcium, not enough alkalinity. There's got to be a reason why those numbers are high. Either you're doing it with the salt, or you're doing it manually with a pump, or if you're dosing manually that way. So figure out why they're high, and I would do something about it. I wouldn't just let numbers stay like that, because it doesn't take much to push it over the edge. what I would do is if everything checks out and it's just naturally high, I would go ahead and do water changes, maybe 30% over a week. Like, that kind of seems to be a good fix for a lot of stabilization wise for a reef tank. So maybe do 30% every other day to get those numbers back to normal. I wouldn't stop dosing or just go cold turkey on any kind of method, because that might be shock to the system. So you want to get down to about 9 DKH, about 400 to 450 calcium, your magnesium around 1350. And magnesium is one of those things that it's just going to have to naturally fall. I've had the issue before, as I mentioned, and the best thing I did was just let it naturally come down over time. It takes a long time, because when you do a water change, you're replenishing that magnesium, because you don't really have a choice, because it's already in the salt. So you just got to naturally have it come down. Again, you want that like 1350, 1450, about that. 1500 is about max. I know 1600 to 1800 is what we use to kill bryopsis. My chair squeaking. So again, you want to get a little bit lower. Now, the other side of that is if everything is doing well, you have a tendency to leave it alone. But just understand that if the problem isn't fixed, because obviously something is wrong that's causing it that way. If it's not fixed, it could get worse, and it could go from looking beautiful one day to stone cold white the next. So just keep that in mind. All right. So good luck, and feel free to email me or let me know in the comment section if you ever figured it out. All right. Okay, so moving on to our last question. Hey Travis, hope all is well. I would like to know your thoughts, perhaps discuss in a Q&A video on using a recirculating CO2 scrubber, not for the sake of chasing numbers, but for overall coral growth. Like you and most reefers without a CO2 scrubber, my pH ranges from 7.8 to 8.0. I've been doing research, primarily BRS, which results seem promising, but is it worth the cost? As I understand, you would be going through a good amount of media per month. All right, so my overall thought process when it comes to CO2 scrubbers is if you're having a hard time staying above 7.8 pH, then yes, I would consider getting one regardless of the size of the tank that you have. Now, in most cases, plumbing your skimmer outside and or running a refugium on the opposite life cycle of your main display, you shouldn't have a problem staying above 7.8. The 300 here has never seen 8.3. I've talked about this before, I think in my dosing guide video, but between 7.9 and 8.05 is about average for this tank. The only time I've seen it even at 8.1 is because I had the door open. It was perfect outside, and it was just this awesome breeze coming in here, and I had the hood open, and everything seemed to be just perfect, and I got 8.1, and I felt pretty good about it. I've been offered to use CO2 scrubbers, but I just don't feel like spending the money on them. Even though it was going to be provided free, I would eventually have to buy media for the damn thing, and I just don't, I don't care. 8.3, 8.1, that shit doesn't mean anything to me. If the tank is growing, polyp extension looks good, coloration's good, and you're getting good growth in the tank, then who cares about 8.3? I'll take my 8.05 any day, as long as the tank is doing well. So yeah, if you have a ton of money to spend and you want to buy the media and you can afford it and do all that shit, then go ahead. If you're above 7.9 and your tank is growing well, and you've already plumbed outside and you have a refugium, then leave it alone. The tank is, there's other things to be thinking about besides that. So yeah, hopefully that answers your questions. I didn't want to go off on a ramp. I almost did for a second there. So yeah, I'll stop the video now. We're at about 18 and a half minutes. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you have any more questions or you want to be a part of one of these videos, again, email me at fishofhex@gmail.com, and I'm going to try to do one of these at least every 2 weeks. This one is like 3 weeks out, so, or 3 weeks since my last one. So we're going to try to do it every other week. You know, it is what it is. I just try to fit it in between all the content. So I'll see you guys Monday with another video. Peace.